representatives of the Fourth Estate, our press, those tuning in online, very warm welcome to our first press briefing for 2023, which is a very important year for the citizens of Zimbabwe. It's the year which we not only go to the polls, but a year where the citizens win Zimbabwe for change. Now, in the lead up to that process, we're all familiar with the constitutional requirements that are necessary to be followed to ensure that we've got a free, fair, and credible election. And the most important of those for our purposes today is the delimitation draft report that was laid before Parliament on Friday, the 6th of January. It's a report that our parliamentarians, our lawyers, our statisticians, and other experts are currently seized with and are analyzing. And in fact, the submission by the CCC is being finalized as we speak to be presented to the Delimitation Committee, which is a committee of Parliament. And then obviously what we're going to say today as the formal position of the Citizens Coalition for Change is what's going to inform the debate of our parliamentarians. I want to emphasize that everything that we're saying today is the substance of wide consultation we've had with citizens, electoral experts, and lawyers. Even though the formal report was only, the draft report was tabled on Friday, we have been seized with the delimitation process for just over 12 months now. The CCC has been engaging ZEC in writing and during multi-party liaison meetings. We have also been participating in some of the stakeholder meetings at district levels and giving ZEC our contribution, raising our concerns. Obviously, we have had challenges with the fact that ZEC has not always responded to our written submissions. In fact, we sent them a full dossier, which had a number of concerns, and that hasn't been responded to. And our position today is that it's not too late for these things to be taken into account. Now, before I go into the substance of the press briefing, I just want to, if I may, talk a little bit about the violence that we witnessed this weekend in Murewa. It's important to state that this is not an isolated incident. It's part of a wide pattern of violence that has permeated our electoral landscape ever since the Citizens Coalition for Change was formed on the 24th of January. We've seen in almost every single province violence perpetrated by ZANU-PF. And that violence must be understood in the context of the fact that the deputy leader of ZANU-PF actually called for the CCC to be crushed like lice. It's also in the context of the fact that the leader of ZANU-PF actually called out and said, "Vakombe, kombai murove." He went so far as to say, "Van be CCC ngabatanganiswe." We also have on record meetings of ZANU-PF members when they call for the killing of our president, Nelson Chamisa, and for CCC members' homes to be burned, for them to be killed because they're sellouts. We've seen this in Matobo and in Season, Berenkwa, and Gutu, and Chipinge, Murewa, almost every single province. And this is a reaction to the mass mobilization program that was launched by President Nelson Chamisa. It's popularly known as Mgwazu. But the essence of it is that the CCC has penetrated every single village, town, and city in Zimbabwe, something that ZANU-PF didn't expect and that they didn't budget for. And what the recent violence, or the several incidents of violence, have shown is that it's a myth that ZANU-PF, rural areas are ZANU-PF strongholds. The CCC has clearly penetrated these areas and they're running scared. Because what other explanation is there for someone who's 75 years old? You go into their homestead and start beating them up. For the avoidance of doubt, we condemn violence in the strongest of terms. We want peace, we want elections, we don't want war. We don't want a repeat of these incidents. And we've said time and again that ZEC has a constitutional obligation under Section 156 to ensure that mechanisms are in place to avoid political violence. And yet they've been completely quiet. Also, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission have an obligation to ensure that such incidents of violence don't take place. And yet, despite various engagements and written submissions by us to them, including dossiers, they do nothing. Same goes for the Human Rights Commission. And as for the police service, we've repeatedly said that ZANU-PF must stop abusing the police service to achieve its own ends. We call for an independent, impartial investigation into the violence that took place against our members in Murewa. And it's not enough for the police service, frankly, to just say we're investigating, because that's exactly what they said about Acton Mashayanyika in July. Nothing has happened. They said they'd come back to us with a full investigative report after the killing of Mo Blessing Ali. To date, nothing has happened. To date, the killers of Mboneni Ngube have not been held to account. How many more CCC members must be beaten, maimed, or killed before state institutions carry out their constitutional obligation? This does not bode well for what we want, which is a free, fair, and credible election in 2023. Now I come to delimitation. As you're all aware, delimitation is an important constitutional process. In the context of elections in Zimbabwe, it's the fixing of electoral boundaries and the process of dividing the country into constituencies and wards for the purposes of electing persons as constituency members of the National Assembly and as councillors of local authorities. In terms of our law and our constitution, there are 210 constituencies in Zimbabwe. And this is a process that's to be carried out in terms of sections 160 and 161 of the Constitution, as well as Section 37A of the Electoral Act. Now, the importance of this process, obviously, is that elections in Zimbabwe must be held on the basis of universal adult suffrage, number one, and equality of votes, number two. This is something that's provided for in Section 155 of the Constitution. The important thing being that there should be an approximately similar number of voters, registered voters in every single constituency. Now I come to the draft report that was laid before Parliament. We have combed through it not once, not twice, quite a few times. And we have to state from the outset that it's not the best delimitation report, but it's not the worst at the same time. It offers a useful starting point. And I think what's crucial in the entirety of the delimitation process are what's going to happen from here. And the important thing is that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission must ensure that it takes into account the feedback of stakeholders, especially members of parliament, lawyers, and other experts. It must be highlighted that the boundaries that Zimbabwe is using today were drawn up in 2007 for purposes of the 2008 election. And so we say that it's untenable, unimaginable, if not farcical, to go to an election in 2023 with boundaries based on data that is over 3 election cycles out of date. There have been significant changes in the population, but more importantly, there was a fresh new start registration of voters in 2017, the biometric voter registration process for the 2018 election where everybody registered anew. What this tells us is that the 2007 data, which is the basis of current boundaries, is wildly out of step with the geographic and other demographic information that obtains in Zimbabwe today. So efforts must go to improving the delimitation draft report so that we have boundaries that are in sync with population and registration data. It's no answer to just say, oh, we don't like it, we're throwing it all out. That is not the position of the Citizens Coalition for Change. Now, I'm going to highlight our key points. We've got 5 key points that I'm going to touch on, and then I'm obviously going to defer proceedings to our technical lead on delimitation, who's Ms. Ellen Shiriedenga, to add a few more points on the data. But I wish to highlight 5 things. Number 1, we restate our demand for an electronic copy of the voters' roll. everything when it comes to delimitation turns on the voters' roll. It tells us the number of voters in any given area. You know, we can't just get a table from ZEC saying that there are 33,000 voters in Mount Pleasant or 22,000 in Bulawayo Central. That's not enough. We have to see the actual voters' roll so that we can ensure that the data that they're giving us meets the verifiability test. Our constitution says that an election must not only be free and fair, it has to be verifiable. So that is the foundational document. It's the syllabus for any election, and we can't understand for the life of us why ZEC would hold it. And without it, it must be emphasized, we can't really have a meaningful conversation about delimitation. And so we repeat our demand for a copy of the electronic voters' roll. What has the CCC done? Obviously, we put the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission in Mora. We wrote to them months ago, actually, demanding an electronic copy of the voters' roll. They've neglected or refused to give us a copy of that voters' roll, and so we've actually taken them to court. We've got a litigant, Rusty Markham, and a number of other citizens and stakeholders have done the same thing. It would be a shame if ZEC did not carry out its constitutional obligation to make available the electronic voters' roll. Number two, the question of the 20% thresholds. In terms of the law, there should generally be an equal number of voters in each constituency in Zimbabwe. This is something that's provided for in the Constitution. Specifically, Section 161, subsection 6, says that there should not be a variation or a difference of more than 20% between any given constituencies and the number of registered voters. Now, it's important to highlight that Section 161, subsection 6, does not mention any average. It doesn't speak of a median. The critical issue, as far as the CCC is concerned, is that whatever mathematical formula you use, it mustn't arrive at a situation where there's a more than 20% disparity between the registered voters in any constituency. And you know, an example of this, and Ellen is going to give you more, is Mount Pleasant has 33,153 registered voters according to the table. We don't accept that figure until we've seen the electronic voters' roll. Then you've got Bulawayo Central, which is 22,115. That's a variation clearly of over 20%. What that will mean is that those who are registered in Mount Pleasant, they don't have the same equality of votes as those registered in Bulawayo Central. There should not be a discrepancy that big when you're delimiting, and that's something that we have placed as one of our demands, one of our submissions that has to be looked at. ZEC must be true to the correct interpretation of Section 161, subsection 6. It must not gerrymander its interpretation of the Constitution. Number three, our analysis of the draft delimitation report reveals that urban constituencies have been understated and given less constituencies than are due numerically based on the data they give, which again, I say reservedly and advisedly, we don't accept until we get the roll. However, rural constituencies have been overstated. Now, based on the data that's presented in the report about how many persons are registered to vote, more citizens have registered in urban constituencies. Fewer have registered in rural constituencies. However, these rural constituencies are given more constituencies. Harare is the starkest example in this regard, and Ellen is going to make reference to this. Based on the number of registered voters they say they have, Harare should have at least 36 constituencies, but it's only been allocated 30. We call for ZEC to be true to the data in as far as Harare is concerned and ensure that the citizens of Harare have equality in terms of the effect of their votes and representation in Parliament. On the same point, something that's a glaring deficiency of the report is that ZEC has not revealed polling areas and polling stations. We need these to be clearly identified. We want to know which polling area, which polling station is which, because one of the key principles under Section 160, Section 161 as well, is we have to look at the geographical data before deciding on a boundary. So they must tell us where the polling stations should be. And there has been concern of gerrymandering around the drawing of boundaries, which is something obviously we won't accept. Number 4, the CCC has a huge concern around the under-registration of voters, where regardless had to the recent census data that was availed, it tells us that approximately 3 million eligible citizens are not yet registered to vote, which we say is a scandal. Constitutionally, ZEC has the obligation under Section 156 to ensure that every eligible citizen is registered to vote. What happens to those 3 million? Why has the process been made so difficult? Why have there been such difficulties with access to identity documents? Why has a sparse number of registration centers been availed? ZEC must ensure that this is attended to before the finalization of the report, and we call for a blitz, in fact, to take place before the final delimitation report is concluded. Which takes me to the 5th and final point, which is a call for, and this is something a little bit futuristic, reform around the delimitation process for the future. Now, I've highlighted that we've been participating in this process for over 12 months now, and we've noted a number of gross irregularities in the manner in which the process has been conducted. There is ambiguity and gaps in terms of how the process is to take place. We have had challenges with some of the bureaucracy and capacity of public officials, including with respect to the Surveyor General's office who are involved in the process. Sometimes we've been given antiquated maps. And so for the future, we really recommend the enactment of a delimitation act, which spells out the process very clearly so that we don't have problems. I'm sure we've all seen what's happening. Even ZEC itself seems to have ambiguity around how this should take place. That should never happen. There has to be certainty and positivity around the procedure. So we call for a delimitation act that establishes the delimitation commission whose sole business is to ensure the boundaries are correct. There have to be delimitation regulations that are very clear about how stakeholders are heard in the process, how their data is not only publicized, the time at which the voter's roll is availed to everybody, and this should be non-negotiable to ensure that the data is correct. And so with those 5 points stated, these are the 5 points that are going to drive our engagement in Parliament and our submissions to the committee and to ZEC. I'm going to now defer proceedings to Madam Shiriebenga, who's going to elucidate on some of these points and highlight other technical aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Fancy, for that elaborate presentation. Good afternoon, everyone, members of the press. We are here as the CCC to articulate our response with regards to the delimitation report, which I'm sure most of you saw it in circulation last week. Before I get into the nitty-gritties regarding our what we verified in the report, let me just give you the add on to the context which spokesperson Fadzi spoke about. Firstly, let me talk about the procedural issues that we observed towards the drafting of this delimitation report. First and foremost, let me reiterate the fact that we as the CCC, we did not sit back on our laurels while the process was going ahead. We tried engaging ZEC, and even in some of the consultative, in fact, in most of the consultative meetings, we sent our representatives to actually go and listen what ZEC was presenting on, and also make submissions with respect to the aspirations of the Triple C. First and foremost, there's the aspect of the fact that ZEC failed to avail the voters' roll. I think Fadi elaborately spoke about that. But the implications with that non-availability of the voters' roll, at the end of the day, we are not able to validate the delimitation process because we don't have the statistics. As you might be aware, one of the primary determinants of the delimitation exercise is the number of registered voters. So really, if we can't ascertain for a fact to say, for example, in Harare, there were 952,000 people on the voters' roll, then it becomes problematic to actually verify the law. So that is one issue that we're concerned about. And also with respect to our engagements with ZEC with regards to the voters' roll, we met numerous requests, and even one of our members of parliament, Rastemakam, has actually taken ZEC to court with regards to the availability of the voters' roll. So that is one issue of concern that we are raising. And secondly, the fact that ZEC, in the beginning of this process, ZEC went out of its way to map the polling areas. So basically, ZEC has a list of those polling areas, but those polling areas were never availed to the public. More so, in the absence of the voters' roll, we're not able to ascertain as to how many people were in the respective polling areas. And the importance of these polling areas, let me emphasize. You know, the boundaries are drawn with respect to the numbers of people in a specific polling area. And those numbers, remember, they are the ones that contribute to certain thresholds. So at the end of the day, if you don't have the polling area statistics, then it becomes very difficult to validate the boundaries, the way the boundaries have been drawn. This is why the issue of gerrymandering comes into light. Thirdly, the methodology with regards to the delimitation process was not explicitly articulated. The fact that if you go to our constitution, section 161.6, it is clear with issues to do with the community of interest, for example, that when delimiting the boundaries, you should ensure that people or citizens that have similar characteristics, they reside in one ward or polling area, so as to have that continuity with regards to issues to do with ethnicity, means of communication, and also there are issues to do with geography. So those issues were never articulated by ZEC as to how they're going to take them into account. And those are some of the issues which the stakeholders during the public consultative processes were supposed to discuss and present. If you are aware, some time back, even, some traditional leaders, just a few weeks ago, they actually came out to say, no, we're never consulted. But the traditional leadership system, the chieftaincy boundaries, they are very paramount in our Zimbabwean culture. So those are some of the considerations which were saying they were never fully taken into account by ZEC. The fourth issue, of course, is the clarity with regards to the 20% variation to the threshold. I think, I will explain that later as we proceed with this presentation. But clearly, ZEC did not follow the provisions of our constitution. Actually, as a matter of fact, ZEC used the old Lancaster House constitution in ascertaining the thresholds. The fifth issue, which is really of an important nature, and it's in line with what Champion Fadzi spoke about, the failure to align the electoral laws to the constitution and the failure to rationalize laws with, regarding elections into one electoral act document. In that respect, I speak about the role of the Ministry of Local Government in the demarcation of ward boundaries. If you look at the Urban Councils Act and the RDC Act, it also speaks to the issue of redrawing of ward boundaries. And the Electoral Act also places that same responsibility to ZEC as well. So in that respect, there was some kind of conflict. You have the Local Government Act requiring local authorities to make submissions to ZEC to say, we as Bulawayo City Council, for example, because of certain variables like the population growth, we are able to sustain so many wards. And we have our local authorities, particularly which are the triple Cs, which are in charge or which are in the urban centers, they actually wrote to local government to say, for example, Harare currently has 46 wards. They requested an extension up to 55. We are all aware of the growth patterns in Harare. That growth, that request to increase the number of wards was necessitated by the population growth in Harare. And also the fact that, it becomes very impossible. Like, for example, you go to Harare South. Harare South is a constituency, yes, but it's also a ward. That's ward number 1 in Harare. It's got a population of over 84,000 people. And that's that ward is being serviced by one councillor. So on that basis, Harare City Council felt, it's prudent that we increase the number of wards so that we don't place a lot of burden on councillors and on service delivery as well. But that request was rejected. So this is why I needed to emphasize the role of the local government ministry in this respect. Getting into the detail with regards to our analysis. First and foremost, our constitution speaks to the equality of the voting strength. To say all constituencies should resemble some, equality in terms of voter registration figures. Same applies to local authorities. If you have Harare, for instance, as a local authority, the number of wards within that local authority, they should resemble some sense of equality. They should be equal. That's the equality of voting strength. Because each ward, for example, is 1 vote. So that's the equality of voting strength we're talking about. But then if you look at the way the thresholds were calculated, there's the equality of voting strength, but also there's section 161.6 in our constitution. It speaks of other considerations with regards to delimitation. Because we should appreciate that, not all wards or constituencies are the same. They've got specific variables. You can't compare rural and urban. They've got certain geographical, differences. So those are some of the considerations. When it comes to that, the Constitution says, in order to accommodate those other considerations, let there be a 20% variance factor. That variance is to at least give some sort of allowance to accommodate those different variables within the constituencies and within the wards as well. The Triple C, I think our spokesperson was elaborate on that. There was the miscalculation of that 20% variance. In fact, there was a misinterpretation of the Electoral Act. The average number of constituencies throughout the country is 27,640. what ZEC did now, despite the, okay, let me go to to what the law says. The law says the way the 20% that plus or 20% variance should be calculated based relatively on the other wards or constituencies. So there should be some bit of there should be some comparison between the two. There should be no ward or constituency which is more than 20% when it is compared to the other. Despite that, we have Bulawayo Central, for example, which has the least numbers of people that are registered, which is around 22,000. You speak of Mount Pleasant with 33,150, which is the highest. You calculate the variance, the percentage variance between those two constituencies, they are 40%. And clearly, that is a violation of our constitution. This is the premise where we come in with our response as the CCC. But that miscalculation has some derivative impact on the allocation of seats per province. What we call malapportionment. You go to Harare, for instance. Harare has been given 30. It has been shortchanged by 4. Harare has the most number of registered voters. And then you go to Masvingo, for instance. Masvingo has a population of 632,000, and it has been given 26 wards. Yet Harare, with 952,000, has been given 30. So you can tell that there was an overestimate of the number of constituency seats in Masvingo. Same applies, of course, with Bulawayo and Mount South. So there's estimate of seats in those particular provinces. So which is one concern that we have raised. Let me reiterate to say, with this, in this respect, we are coming from a position of principle. We are coming from a position of what the Constitution dictates. So we are saying there is need to rationalize the number of constituency seats per province. Going further in that respect, you would note, for example, that we have Masvingo province. Compare Masvingo province with Mashonaland East and Mashonaland West. Masvingo has less number of registered voters when comparing to the two provinces. For example, Masvingo has 632,000 registered voters, and Mashonaland West has 661,000 registered, and Mashonaland East has 641,000 registered voters. But now, if you go to the seat allocations, Masvingo was given, it has been given 26 seats. Mashonaland West, 22 seats. So Mashonaland West has 4 seats less than Masvingo, yet it has more registered voters. Same applies to Mashonaland East. Mash East has been allocated 23 seats, although it has more registered voters than Masvingo, but it has less number of seats allocated to them by 3 when compared with Masvingo. So that's the kind of malapportionment of with respect to the number of seats which we are referring to. There's another compelling issue that we noted. In terms of assigning higher thresholds to urban constituencies and urban wards. For example, you talk of Harare. Harare as a province has been allocated a higher threshold with an average of about 31,000, which is on the high side. But then you go to other provinces, there is that, that contradiction. So now that is the area that we are kind of concerned about, to say, what is it that ZEC considered in allocating those thresholds? Notwithstanding the fact that they add in terms of calculating that 20% variance. So this is one issue that we are saying we are taking to Parliament to say that issue, that anomaly should be rectified. Fadzi spoke about, the issue of underestimating the urban constituencies and urban wards in terms of, the numbers of constituents, urban constituencies. For example, we speak of Zwishavane Town Council. Let me focus on town councils. Speak of Zwishavane Town Council. The voter population in Zwishavane Town Council is 25,344. If you are to look at the threshold that has been assigned by ZEC, that town council on its own, it qualifies to be a constituency. But what did ZEC do now? ZEC had to literally take away some of the wards in Zwishavane. 8 have been allocated to Zwishavane Ngezi, 2 to Zwishavane Rungi. That's the kind of gerrymandering which we are referring to. We go further to even Bindura town, for example. Bindura on its own, it does qualify to be, Bindura is a town council. It does qualify to be a local authority, or to be a constituency. It has 23,540 voters. But what happened now? 2 rural wards were added into the town council to constitute Bindura North. So that's the kind of information and justification that we require from ZEC. What was the rationale for that? The most glaring case is Beitbridge Town Council. Beitbridge Town Council, although going by the ZEC threshold, it falls short of the minimum threshold by 1,178 voters. Beitbridge has 6 wards. It has 6 wards. The population there is 20,934. Ideally, would have expected a situation, because remember earlier on, we spoke about section 161.6 with regards to other considerations in delimiting the boundaries, the community of interest. But that was not taken into account. We have a Beitbridge town with its 6 wards. Ideally, if ZEC was to maintain the community of interest and respect section 161.6, it would have drawn some wards within the periphery of Beitbridge, just maybe 1 or 2 wards, so that they reach the required threshold. But that was not done. Instead, what does ZEC do? It divides the 6 wards in Beitbridge town into 2 constituencies, Beitbridge West and Beitbridge East. We ask, what is the rationale for that? We have Beitbridge, most of you do appreciate how small Beitbridge town is. Although it is densely populated, but the people live together in unison. Now we have a situation where the town is separated by a street. This street, for instance, now goes to Beitbridge East. The opposite street goes to Beitbridge West. Where is the community of interest there? And by the way, Beitbridge West is predominantly rural. Same applies to Beitbridge East. So that is the kind of rationale we need to get from Z. Lastly, on the town councils, there's Masvingo municipality. Masvingo has a different scenario altogether. Masvingo, its population as a town council is 43,767. So meaning that Masvingo, it did qualify for a constituency. That's why we have Masvingo Urban. But what does ZEC do with the remainder of those people that are not in Masvingo Urban? With Masvingo issue, it's more or less the same with Beitbridge. To say, yes, the first ward, Masvingo Urban, will be purely urban, with all the 10 urban wards in Masvingo. Then the remainder, you draw a few wards from within the periphery. That was not done. Instead, the remainder has been split into 3 different constituencies. Masvingo West, Masvingo North, and of course, Masvingo Urban. So we have Masvingo municipality, which is now in 3 different constituencies. You go to Mangwe constituency, which is rural, which is which is not part of these urban constituencies. We have Mangwe constituency, which is now split amongst 3 local authorities. There's Mangwe RDC, Bulilima RDC, and Plumtree Town Council. What is the rationale of making sure that a constituency is broken down into different local authorities? We ask ourselves as the citizens of Zimbabwe, in terms of development in those particular areas, how do you differentiate between the local authority administrative boundaries versus the political constituency boundaries? That at the end of the day, creates some kind of a discord. For example, Masvingo as a town council, literally now he has 3 members of parliament. And in terms of development, what impact does that have? Does that promote development, or maybe at the end of the day, it creates some discord? So those are some of the issues that we said needs to be rationalized. I won't dwell much into the issues of gerrymandering. Those ones are glaring. You go to the way because the boundaries have been reconstructed. You go to Mutasa, for example. You ask yourself, there's a ward that has been literally removed and another one placed in Dangamvura there. You ask yourself, what was the rationale? You go to, for example, the former Gwanda Central. It has been split into 3 constituencies, to an extent that there's a ward which comes from Beitbridge RDC, which is supposed to be part of the same constituency with wards that are in Gwanda town. We are talking of a distance of around 180 kilometers. And that is another classic case of gerrymandering. Harare, for instance. Yes, Harare might say, yes, Harare has gained 1. But how have been the boundaries drawn? You ask even the new Churu constituents, how is that boundary being drawn? What were the motivational issues towards the drawing of that particular boundary? So basically, those are some of the issues that we are raising, which we are dear to. But let me hasten to say, all this could have been avoided if there was adequate consultations. We wrote to ZEC on the 8th of October, raising all these concerns that you're talking about. We never got a response. There had been engagement over these issues at stakeholder meetings. then you'll be telling a different story. So this is where we are as the CCC. We have presented our document to Parliament. We are presenting it this afternoon. And these are our concerns. And we hope they'll be taken into consideration. But like what our spokesperson reiterated on, these are issues that can be rectified. What we simply do not envisage is us going back to the 2008 boundaries, because they are no longer valid in this case. We had a BVR exercise in 2017 with new people on the voters' roll. Surely we can't have a new voters' roll with all boundaries. We can't revert to a situation where we have a Harare South ward councillor servicing 84,000 people. While list others, for example, in Rutu, there's a constituency currently with around 14,000 registered voters. There's that discrepancy. So this is our call as the CCC to say, these are our issues. As Parliament, let's work around them. Let's make sure that we follow the law. Let's rationalize the boundaries so that at the end of the day, there won't be anyone who will be saying there's gerrymandering and malapportionment of constituencies and wards. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shilibenga. And now we are going to take a few questions. Should there be any questions arising, we'll take just a few because of our time. Yes, sir. As usual, may you please state your name, the news house you're from, and stick to just asking one question so that we can have as many as possible in the limited time that we have.
Thank you, Mansal. I'm wishing you the questions. I would want to ask, considering the fact that you have been sitting in various meetings with ZEC and you have made your submissions in that regard, do you think after tabling this report, legislators looking into the report, as well as you making these findings and submissions, is there going to be a change in that regard?
There has to be. There has to be. There has to be. There has to be a change. That's the whole point of this report being laid before Parliament. It's so that it's debated and fixed and adjusted. The law doesn't envisage that the report will be perfect, although ZEC does have an obligation to consult stakeholders. And every single recommendation that we've made is something that can be fixed in the limited time that's available. I think in terms of the timelines that ZEC gave, they wanted to finalize the process by about February, March. There's enough time if they're sincere. We've seen them act in an accelerated manner previously. We saw it in 2017, we saw it in 2018, where they were serious, for example, about voter registration. This lethargy is something that we say is improper, it's unlawful, and we insist on all the recommendations that we're making. So, for example, redrawing boundaries is something that can easily be done. Availing the electronic voters roll, that's just, without question, that's what they used, one would imagine, to create this. So it's available. We know ZANU-PF has it, and the public has a right to it. Every citizen has a right to it. That's what the law says. It's not just the CCC saying. So, of course, it can be done, and it should be done. It's what we insist on, and that's what our parliamentarians are going to push for. And we are going to mount as much political pressure as possible to ensure that these things are done. That's why we are letting the nation know not only what the law says, but our commitment to the fact that the law should be followed. We don't want, after the election in 2023, to be quibbling about this and that and freeness and fairness and credibility, verifiability. Where we've got this opportunity, we must take full advantage of it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Lucy Yassini. I'm a freelance journalist. The two of you have been mentioning figures of registered voters, but at the same time you're saying we haven't received the voters roll.
Correct.
Where are you getting these figures?
Thank you. That's a very good question, Madam Lucy. What ZEC did was that it put tables in its report. You'll note that there's a report that's about 500 pages, then there's an annexure of about 900 pages, and in here, they've got tables. Now, the law doesn't say, ZEC, give us a table of the number of people who are registered. The law says, give us the electronic voters roll so that we can see for ourselves and verify that where you say Ulayo Central has 22,000 voters, we can see that for ourselves and we can identify where they are. Otherwise, how do we know who is where? How do we check whether the boundary that you've drawn is an accurate one? How do we know for real that Mount Pleasant is 33,000? What if it's got less? What if it's got more? The law says that give us that electronic voters roll. So all the figures that we are making reference to in these deliberations, we don't accept them to be correct until that electronic voters roll is availed. I mean, like I said, I can't imagine for the life of me why an electoral management body worth its salt would hide the voters roll. If we were to tell SADC or any other, electoral guideline, Kenya, Malawi, Zambia, that we didn't have the voters roll and we just marched to the election, I mean, they think we're crazy. Delimitation, you've had 10 years to ensure that you've got a voters roll that's compliant with the law. It must be availed. And we've said consistently that ZEC must be independent, impartial, act in accordance with the Constitution, be transparent, ensure that its processes are verifiable. What if they've made a mistake in quoting the number of voters in Jishabani? How will we ever know? And that's what we are on guard to prevent. And that's why since, months ago, in fact, prior to the start of the by-elections, we said, give us the voters roll. After their, half-hearted blitz, we said, now give us what you're using. Why are they afraid to give us that voters roll? We insist on it. We want it. Thank you. If there are no further questions, all that remains is for me to thank you very much for your time, for coming here and for hearing what we've said. What we urge the citizens is let's keep a keen eye on the delimitation process. It's not something that we can just relegate and say, no, whatever happens in Parliament. As citizens, everybody has an interest in ensuring that their vote matters, that their vote will be equal to all the other votes in the country, and to ensure that we've performed our civic duty in holding all administrative authorities to account. As the Triple C, we continue to urge all young people, old people, let's go and register to vote in our millions. Let's turn out to vote on voting day in our millions, and let's then defend the vote in our millions. This is the only way we can get new ethical leaders. Zimbabweans want and deserve a new government led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa. Thank you very much.